She knew they would look at her like she didn't belong, and she came anyway. The black car lights slid across polished marble as Clara Whitmore stepped out onto the curb, her heels touching the ground with quiet precision, the fabric of her simple $40 dress catching just enough light to reveal its plainness among gowns worth thousands, the entrance to the gala glowing gold under chandeliers visible even from outside, laughter spilling through the glass like a world sealed off from her, and she didn't rush, didn't hesitate, just walked forward as if every step had already been decided long before tonight. The line of guests parted subtly, not out of respect but discomfort, eyes flicking over her, measuring, dismissing, a woman in diamonds whispering behind a gloved hand, a man adjusting his cufflinks with a faint smirk, and at the center of it all stood the hostess with a tablet in hand, smile trained but thin, the kind reserved for people who almost made the list. "Name?" she asked without looking up, and Clara answered softly, "Clara Whitmore." The name lingering in the air for half a second too long before fingers tapped the screen, a pause, then a polite tilt of the head. "I'm sorry I don't see you here." And just like that, the space around Clara shifted, conversations resumed but lighter now, edged with quiet amusement, as if the moment confirmed something they had already assumed, that she was out of place, that she had overstepped, that she didn't understand the rules of rooms like this. And inside, through the glass, Ethan Cole raised a champagne glass, his laughter easy, his world intact, his back turned to the entrance where she stood, exactly as he had turned it months ago, and Clara saw it all without flinching, the reflection of him flickering across the glass doors like a memory she no longer reached for, her fingers resting lightly at her side, no clutch, no jewelry, nothing to signal status except the stillness in her posture, and when the hostess shifted her weight, ready to move on, to let security handle it, Clara didn't argue, didn't plead, didn't even blink, she simply glanced down at her watch, a small, almost invisible gesture as if checking the time mattered more than the judgment pressing in from every direction, and in that quiet second, something unspoken settled into place, like a cue only she could hear, because Clara hadn't come to be let in, she hadn't come to convince them of anything, she had come knowing exactly how this would unfold, knowing the moment would stretch just long enough for them to decide who she was, and just as the guard near the door shifted forward, ready to escort her away, Clara lifted her gaze again, calm, steady, already standing where she needed to be. There was a time when that same door opened before she even reached it. The memory did not arrive loudly, it slipped in like a reflection on glass, faint but impossible to ignore. Clara standing in a different dress, softer fabric, lighter color. Her arm looped through Ethan Cole's as cameras turned toward them instead of away. Her name spoken without hesitation, without doubt, the kind of belonging that felt permanent until it quietly was not. And back then she did not notice how every introduction carried his last name before hers, how every handshake lingered a second longer with him, how every decision that mattered happened just slightly out of her reach. She had believed it was partnership, believed the world they stood in was something they had built together, not something she had been allowed to stand inside. And the shift had not happened all at once, it never did. It started with small absences, missed dinners explained by meetings, conversations that ended too quickly, eyes that stopped searching for hers across crowded rooms, until one night, the silence between them stretched too far to ignore, and Ethan had finally said it with a calm that felt colder than anger. "You do not fit into where I am going," as if she were a detail that no longer matched the design of his life, as if everything she had been could be reduced to a misalignment. And she remembered standing there, hands still, heart steady in a way that surprised even her, not because it did not hurt, but because something deeper had already begun to close, something that understood this was not a moment to fight for, it was a moment to walk away from, and the days that followed erased her more efficiently than any argument could have. Her name removed from guest lists, from accounts, from conversations that once included her without question. Invitations stopped arriving, messages went unanswered. The world she had moved through so easily recalibrated itself as if she had never existed inside it at all. And yet what remained was not emptiness, it was space, quiet at first, unfamiliar. But hers in a way nothing had been before. And she had filled it slowly, deliberately, with mornings that did not depend on anyone else's schedule, with work that did not require permission, with decisions that did not need to be approved, learning again how to stand without being introduced, how to move without being escorted, how to exist without being defined by someone else's position. And over time the silence that once surrounded her stopped feeling like rejection and began to feel like control, like something she could shape. instead of something that shaped her. And now, standing outside those same glass doors, hearing the distant echo of laughter that once included her, Clara did not feel the urge to step back into that version of herself. She did not reach for the past or the place she used to hold inside it, because she understood something they did not, something Ethan had never needed to learn, that belonging given can be taken, but belonging built cannot be erased. And as the guard moved closer, expecting hesitation, expecting explanation, Clara remained exactly where she was, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she had chosen this moment long before anyone else realized it had already begun. Sometimes the most powerful move is to say nothing at all. The guard stopped just short of her, close enough for her to hear the faint crackle of his earpiece, his posture polite but firm, the kind of stance that had removed countless people like her without ever raising a voice. And still Clara did not look at him, her attention resting somewhere just beyond the glass doors where reflections blurred faces into shapes, where laughter softened into something distant and unimportant. And behind that glass Ethan shifted slightly, turning just enough for his profile to catch the light, his expression relaxed, confident, untouched by anything happening outside, because in his world nothing unexpected ever reached him, not anymore, not since he had learned how to control every variable that could threaten his image. And for a brief second the guard cleared his throat, preparing to speak, to deliver the same line he had used all night, but the words never came, because something in Clara's stillness interrupted the rhythm of the moment, something that did not match the pattern he was used to. She was not embarrassed, not defensive, not even impatient. She stood as if she belonged to a different timeline entirely, one that had already moved past this exchange, and it made him hesitate, just slightly, just enough for the hostess to step in again, her smile tighter now, voice lowered but edged with urgency. "Ma'am, if your name is not on the list, I am going to have to ask you to step aside." And Clara turned her head then, not fully, just enough to meet the woman's eyes, calm, steady, almost kind, and for a moment the noise around them seemed to dim, as if the entire entrance was holding its breath for something it could not yet see. And Clara did not argue, did not correct her, did not reach for a phone or a name or a connection. She simply nodded once, as if acknowledging a fact that had already been accounted for. And then she stepped forward, not past the guard, not into the building, but just enough to shift her position out of the line, a subtle movement that confused expectation, because it looked like compliance but felt like control, and the guard mirrored her motion without realizing it, adjusting his stance, recalibrating, waiting for the next signal that never arrived. And Clara's gaze drifted again to the reflection in the glass, not to Ethan this time, but to the space around him, the room itself, the movement of servers, the timing of conversations, the quiet choreography of a night built on appearances. And somewhere within that rhythm she found what she had been waiting for. A shift so small no one else noticed it. A pause between one moment and the next, and her fingers moved lightly at her side, not fidgeting, not nervous, just present, grounded, as if every second was exactly where it needed to be. And when the guard finally raised his hand to gesture toward the sidewalk, ready to end the interaction, a voice came through his earpiece, low and sharp, changing everything before a single word could be spoken. And Clara did not react, did not turn, did not even blink, because she had already heard it coming long before anyone else realized the moment had changed. The guard froze for a fraction of a second, the kind of pause that does not belong in a place designed to run smoothly, his hand still mid-gesture as the voice in his earpiece cut through whatever script he had been following, and something in his posture shifted, not dramatically, but enough for the trained eye to notice, shoulders straightening, chin lifting just slightly, as if the air around him had been recalibrated by an unseen authority. And Clara saw it. Without looking, felt it in the silence that replaced the low murmur of dismissal, because moments like this never announced themselves loudly, they arrived quietly and rearranged everything. And the hostess noticed it too, her expression tightening as she glanced at the guard, waiting for him to proceed, to finish what he had started. But he did not move, did not speak. His attention now split between the woman in front of him and the instruction repeating softly in his ear. And inside the glass doors the rhythm of the evening continued, glasses clinking, voices overlapping, Ethan turning slightly as someone approached him, unaware that the space just outside his carefully controlled world was beginning to shift in ways he had not accounted for. And Clara remained exactly where she was, her weight balanced, her breathing steady, not anticipating, not reacting, simply present in the moment she had already chosen. And then the guard lowered his hand, slowly, deliberately, the gesture incomplete but unmistakable, and stepped back half a pace, creating space where there had been none before. And the hostess blinked, confusion flickering across her face as she leaned in, her voice now quieter, edged with uncertainty. "Is there a problem?" she asked, but the guard did not answer her, not immediately, his gaze settling fully on Clara for the first time, not as someone out of place, but as someone he needed to recognize, and there was a brief moment where everything hung in balance, where the decision had not yet been spoken aloud, where the roles had not yet been officially reversed, and in that suspended second Clara lifted her eyes to meet his, calm, unhurried, as if she had been expecting him to arrive at this exact realization all along, and the faintest nod passed between them, not agreement, not acknowledgement in the traditional sense, but something quieter, something that confirmed the shift without needing to explain it, and the guard straightened fully then, turning slightly toward the door as his hand moved to the handle, not to block, but to open, and the hostess took a step back instinctively, her certainty dissolving into something else, something closer to recognition, though she did not yet understand what she was recognizing, and as the first inch of the door gave way, releasing a stronger wash of light and sound from inside, Clara did not move forward immediately. She allowed the moment to unfold, to be seen, to be felt, because this was not about entering the room, it was about the room realizing who had been standing outside it all along, and behind the glass, just as the door began to open wider, Ethan's laughter faltered for the briefest second, not because he saw her clearly, but because something in the atmosphere shifted, something subtle but undeniable, like a change in pressure before a storm, and Clara took one step forward, not hurried, not hesitant, but perfectly timed, as if she were not crossing a threshold, but returning to a place that had been waiting for her to claim it. The door opened wider, and with it came a shift that no one could quite explain but everyone could feel, the kind of shift that silenced conversations without asking for attention, that slowed movements just enough to make people glance up from their glasses, their phones, their carefully curated interactions, and Clara stepped inside as if the space had always been hers to enter, her heels landing softly against the polished floor, each step measured, unhurried, carrying none of the urgency of someone trying to prove they belonged, because she was not here to convince anyone, she was here because the moment required her presence, and the guard remained by the door, no longer watching her as a potential problem but standing at attention as if guarding something far more important than the entrance itself, and the hostess said nothing. Her role dissolved in the wake of a decision she had not made, her eyes following Clara with a question she could not yet form, and inside the room the lighting seemed warmer, brighter, but it did not touch Clara the same way it touched the others, it reflected off sequins and diamonds, but on her it settled differently, softer, as if the simplicity of her dress refused to compete and instead absorbed the space around it, turning attention into something quieter, something harder to ignore, and, one by one, conversations faltered, not because people recognized her immediately, but because they recognized the disruption, the presence of someone who moved without seeking permission, and that was rare in a room built on silent hierarchies, and near the center, Ethan turned fully this time, his gaze drawn not by her face but by the subtle shift in attention around her, the way people adjusted, the way space opened just slightly as she passed, and for a moment his expression remained unchanged, confident, certain, until recognition began to surface, slow and unwelcome, like a memory he had already decided no longer mattered, and beside him, the woman at his side leaned in, whispering something light, something dismissive, but Ethan did not respond immediately, his eyes narrowing just enough to suggest calculation, as if he were trying to place her not as she was now, but as she had been, and finding that the two did not align, and Clara did not look at him, not yet, her gaze moving past clusters of guests, past servers carrying trays, past the familiar layout of a world she had once navigated differently, and there was no hesitation in her steps, no pause to absorb the reactions building quietly around her, because she had already lived through the version of herself that needed those reactions to define her, and that version was no longer present, and somewhere near the stage a coordinator glanced at a clipboard, then toward the entrance, confusion flickering briefly before being replaced by something sharper, more focused, as if a missing piece had just arrived, and Clara felt it without turning, the alignment of timing, the quiet confirmation that everything was unfolding exactly as it had been set into motion, and when she finally slowed just slightly, it was not because she had reached her destination, but because the room had reached hers, because every eye that mattered had begun to notice, not who she used to be, but who she was now, and across the distance Ethan took a step forward, his confidence returning in the form of a smile that did not quite reach his eyes, preparing to meet her on terms he believed he still controlled, not realizing that the ground beneath those terms had already begun to shift beyond his reach. The difference was never the room, it was who controlled it. Ethan's steps were smooth, practiced, the kind of approach that had closed deals and commanded attention for years, his smile returning fully now, polished and confident as he moved toward Clara, each stride carrying the quiet assumption that whatever this moment was, he could still define it, and the woman beside him followed half a step behind, her expression curious, slightly amused, as if she were about to witness something mildly entertaining, something easily dismissed, and around them, the air shifted again, not louder, not more dramatic but tighter, more focused as conversation softened into background noise, eyes drifting toward the space between them, waiting without appearing to wait, and Clara finally turned her gaze toward him, not sharply, not with challenge, but with a calm recognition that did not reach for the past, that did not acknowledge the version of him she had once known, and for a fraction of a second that unsettled him, not enough to show, but enough to register because he was used to reactions to emotions he could measure and respond to, and her stillness offered none of that. "Clara," he said, his tone light, almost friendly, as if greeting someone he had not expected but was entirely prepared to handle. "I did not realize you would be here." And the sentence hung there, carefully neutral, carrying just enough distance to remind anyone listening that she was not part of this world anymore. And Clara let the words settle without interruption, her posture unchanged, her expression composed, and when she spoke, her voice was soft even without edge. "You were not supposed to." And the response did not challenge him, did not accuse, but it shifted something subtle in the space between them, because it removed the assumption that his awareness mattered, and for the first time the rhythm of the interaction slipped slightly out of his control, and he adjusted, a small tilt of his head, a faint laugh. "Well, this is not exactly your scene anymore," he replied, the words delivered with the ease of someone who believed they were stating a simple fact, something obvious, something already agreed upon by everyone around them, and a few nearby guests exchanged glances, the tension sharpening just enough to be felt, and Clara's eyes did not move from his, not confrontational, not defensive, just present, as if she were observing rather than participating, and she did not respond immediately, allowing the silence to stretch just long enough for his words to settle fully into the room, to reveal their weight without her needing to add to them, and somewhere near the stage, a subtle movement caught the attention of a coordinator. A signal passed quietly between staff members, almost invisible unless someone knew to look for it, and Clara did not look in that direction. She did not need to, because she could feel the shift approaching, the alignment of something larger than this conversation, something already set into motion long before Ethan stepped toward her with his rehearsed confidence, and as he opened his mouth to continue, to reassert the tone he was comfortable with, a voice carried across the room, clear, professional, cutting cleanly through the low hum of conversation. "Ladies and gentlemen, may we have your attention for a moment?" And the effect was immediate. Conversations paused, heads turned, the natural hierarchy of the room redirecting itself toward the stage, and Ethan's focus flickered, just briefly, drawn by the announcement, by the expectation of something important, something that would reinforce his position, his control, and Clara's gaze followed the same direction, not with curiosity, but with quiet certainty, as if she already knew exactly what was about to happen next. The room shifted its attention toward the stage as the announcement settled into the air, a quiet command that everyone obeyed without question, and Clara did not rush to follow. She moved with the same measured calm, turning slightly as if aligning herself with something already in motion, while Ethan adjusted his jacket with a subtle confidence, the kind that came from believing the moment unfolding was meant to elevate him, not disrupt him, and the woman beside him leaned closer, her voice soft with curiosity, but he barely acknowledged it, his focus already shifting to the stage where a host stepped forward, posture precise, smile composed, the kind of presence that signaled importance without needing to raise volume. "Tonight," the host began, "we are honored to welcome a key partner whose vision is shaping the future of this company." And a ripple of interest moved through the crowd, glasses lowered, conversations fully silenced now, every detail sharpening into focus as anticipation built in subtle waves, and Ethan's expression settled into certainty, the faint lift of his chin, the ease in his stance, all suggesting he already knew how this would end. that whatever name was about to be spoken would reinforce everything he had worked toward, everything he believed he controlled, and Clara stood just behind the natural line of attention, not hidden, not highlighted, simply present in a way that did not demand recognition yet could not be ignored, her gaze steady on the stage, her breathing even, as if she had already stepped into this moment long before anyone else arrived. And then there was a pause, deliberate, practiced, the kind that stretched just long enough to hold the room completely still, and in that pause something shifted again, something deeper, like the final turn of a key that had been set in motion long before tonight, and the host continued, voice clear. Please join me in welcoming our primary investor. And for a fraction of a second the name did not come, the silence extending just enough to create tension, to make the reveal feel larger than the words themselves. And Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, not in doubt but in anticipation, ready to respond, ready to step forward if needed, ready to align himself with whatever power was about to be named. And Clara took a single step forward, not toward the stage, but into the line of sight that connected it to the room, a movement so simple it might have gone unnoticed if not for the timing, if not for the way it aligned perfectly with the moment the host finally spoke again. And the name that followed did not echo loudly. It did not need to, because its impact moved differently, not through volume but through recognition, through the sudden recalibration of every assumption in the room. And Ethan's expression did not change immediately, not fully, but there was a break in it, a fracture so small only someone watching closely would see it, as if the version of reality he had been holding on to had just slipped slightly out of alignment. And Clara did not look at him. She did not look at anyone. Her attention remained forward, her posture unchanged, as if the moment unfolding was not a surprise, not a victory to claim, but simply the next step in something she had already decided. And somewhere behind her, quiet but unmistakable, a second presence moved into the light, measured, composed, not ahead of her but just behind, and the room felt it before it fully saw it, the weight of someone whose name did not need to be announced to be understood. And in that layered silence, where expectation met reality and began to separate, Clara continued forward, each step steady, each second aligning exactly as it was meant to, while the world around her slowly realized that the story they thought they were watching was no longer the one. Unfolding before them, the name settled into the room like a quiet shockwave, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable in its effect. And for a moment no one moved, because recognition does not always come with noise. Sometimes it comes with stillness, the kind that forces people to reassess everything they thought they understood. And Clara continued forward, each step aligned with the weight of that recognition, not accelerating, not pausing, as if she had already walked this path countless times in her mind before ever setting foot on it. And behind her, Alexander Hayes followed at a respectful distance, his presence unmistakable now, not because he demanded attention, but because attention naturally adjusted around him. Conversations that had once centered on him now shifting subtly toward her, and that shift did not go unnoticed, not by the investors near the stage, not by the executives who had spent the evening positioning themselves carefully, and certainly not by Ethan, whose expression finally broke in a way he could not fully control, the confidence he had worn moments ago thinning into something sharper, more uncertain, as the name echoed again in his thoughts, aligning with details he had overlooked, connections he had not made, until the realization began to form, slow but irreversible, and Clara reached the front without hesitation, the host stepping aside with a small nod that carried more respect than any introduction could. And for a brief second she stood in the center of the room, not elevated, not isolated, simply present in a way that redefined the space around her. And the lighting caught her differently now, not highlighting wealth or decoration but clarity, the kind that comes from knowing exactly where one stands. And she did not scan the room for approval, did not acknowledge the shifting attention, because none of it was necessary. The moment itself had already done the work, and when she finally spoke, her voice did not rise, it did not need to, it carried through the room with a calm precision that silenced even the quietest movements. "Thank you for your patience," she said, as if the delay had been intentional, as if every second leading here had been part of a larger design. And a subtle ripple moved through the audience, not applause, not yet, but understanding, the kind that settles in gradually, reshaping perception from the inside out. And Ethan stood where he was, no longer moving forward, no longer certain of the ground beneath him, his mind recalculating, trying to reconcile the woman he had dismissed with the presence now standing at the center of the room. and finding no version of the past that could explain the present. And beside him, the woman who had once seemed so certain now shifted slightly, her confidence dimmed by the unspoken realization that she was witnessing something far more significant than a simple encounter. And Clara's gaze moved briefly across the room then, not searching, not lingering, but acknowledging, and for the first time it passed over Ethan, not with emotion, not with judgment, but with a quiet neutrality that erased the significance he once held. And that was the moment the shift became complete, not when her name was spoken, not when she stepped forward, but when he understood that whatever place he thought she had lost, she had never needed to reclaim, because she had built something beyond it, something that did not depend on his recognition. And as the room began to respond, slowly, respectfully, the shape of the night changed entirely, no longer centered on what had been planned, but on what had just been revealed. And Clara stood at the center of it without claiming it, because she did not need to. The truth had already positioned her exactly where she belonged. Power does not announce itself. It rearranges everything around it. The room did not erupt, it did not need to. The shift had already happened in the quiet way that mattered most, in the way conversations softened before they resumed, in the way people adjusted their posture without realizing it, in the way attention no longer searched for direction because it had already found it. And Clara stood at the center of that stillness, not elevated by it, not defined by it, simply aligned with it, her presence no longer questioned, no longer measured, just understood. And the host stepped slightly to the side, allowing the moment to settle fully before continuing. But even without words, the hierarchy of the room had changed, subtly but completely, and Ethan remained where he was, no longer moving forward, no longer certain where forward even was, his mind catching up to a reality that had already moved past him. And for the first time there was no immediate response, no polished line, no effortless recovery, just the quiet recognition that the position he thought he held was no longer his to control. And Clara did not look at him again. She did not need to, because whatever connection had once existed between them had already been replaced by something else, something steadier, something entirely her own. And as the evening began to reshape itself around this new center, Clara turned slightly, not away from the room but through it, her steps measured, calm, moving with the same quiet precision that had carried her to this point. And Alexander followed without stepping ahead, his presence constant but never overshadowing, a reflection of alignment rather than authority. And together they moved through the space that had once excluded her, not claiming it, not challenging it, but existing within it in a way that made resistance irrelevant. And near the edge of the room the doors stood open again, the same doors that had moments ago separated her from everything inside, and now they opened without hesitation, without question, as if the distinction between inside and outside had never truly applied to her. And Clara paused there for just a second, not to look back, not to acknowledge what had been left behind, but simply to let the moment complete itself, because closure did not require confrontation, it required clarity, and she had already found it. And as she stepped forward, leaving the room behind her, the sound of the evening continued without interruption, but it no longer held the same weight, no longer defined the same boundaries. And inside, Ethan remained still for a moment longer before finally turning away, not in defeat, not in drama, but in the quiet understanding that something had ended without needing to be said, and something else had begun without needing permission. And outside, under the same lights that had once exposed her, Clara walked forward without slowing, her reflection no longer caught in the glass behind her, but carried with her, steady and complete. And if anyone had been watching closely enough, they would have seen that she had not returned to reclaim anything, she had simply arrived as someone who no longer needed to.